Hello and welcome back to Ruben Uncut. Now, today, hopefully short episode because I've been busy. Had a very busy weekend. Didn't get around to recording anything of major substance. So today, just having fun. I think, maybe, because today I'm taking a PragerU quiz. Are you on the left or the right? When it comes to issues like business and regulation, healthcare, taxes, education, and personal freedom, how much should the government be involved? Where do you stand on the ideological divide? Now, I've taken PragerU quizzes before, specifically the citizenship test. Now, this will be interesting because one has to wonder what exactly PragerU's motivations or goals are in this situation. What do they want me to what do they want from their audience to get from this? Because obviously if someone was on the left, they really wouldn't line up with PragerU. But let's find out. Question number 1, do you think those who make more money should pay higher percentage of their income in taxes? Now, percentages are a funny thing because percentages, technically speaking, if there was a fair percentage, it would mean that the rich paid more in taxes. However, that being said, the rich tend to get out of paying taxes. Generally speaking, though, I would agree with this. The rich really should contribute more to society if they really want to be considered an asset to it. Do you support the restrictions on free speech in order to combat hate speech? So, this is a loaded question. And let me explain why this is a loaded question. You see, the government does not actually restrict hate speech. Freedom of speech, or your freedom of speech as it is legally put into our rules, protects you from prosecution for your beliefs. However, when you lay it out like this, the problem becomes, what are we actually looking at? Also, what does it mean to curtail hate speech, freedom of speech, to combat hate speech in the first place? What does that actually entail doing? Is it when Twitter censors you or bans you? No, actually, it's not. Twitter can do that. They're a private company who's trying to foster an ecosystem that makes money. Now, I use Twitter as an example, which, of course, I realize now is a terrible example, even though Twitter does still do this. The question also becomes, what counts as restrictions? What counts as censorship? For example, according to Elon Musk himself, hate speech is meant to be shadow banned on Twitter, which means when you write something hateful, they just make sure it doesn't show up in people's feeds. Now that you can still see them by going to the person's page, but this is essentially Twitter's way of censoring you without telling you they're censoring you, because Twitter is a free speech absolutist platform and they want to give you the illusion that they don't care about money. As this is written, I would have to say no. However, it's worth noting that this is an intellectually dishonest question. It's almost, it takes into account zero actual concepts or ideas. It uses very open language. What do we mean by restriction? What do we count as a restriction? What do we count as something that combats hate speech itself? I'm going to go with no, but I want you to know that this question is essentially dishonest. Do you believe the government should be as small as possible in order to maximize the freedom of the individual? Now, this is an interesting question because what does it mean? Well, first of all, PragerU doesn't give a shit about the individual. And we know they don't because they tend to preach conformist rhetoric. They want you to conform to a Judeo-Christian standard, which of course means also giving up being gay or trans or anything else that, doesn't fit into a Judeo-Christian philosophical point of view. Also, no Muslims, even though they are technically a Judeo-Christian religion. You see, if we are truly in favor of the individual, then we have to acknowledge and accept the right of gay, trans, and different religious people to exist in our society and pursue their own happiness as individuals. Now, when people on the right normally refer to freedom of the individual, what they really mean is a person's ability to gain power. And typically they are referring to individuals who are already successful, like, say, Elon Musk. The individualism of Elon Musk is something that the right would proclaim. But what they're really doing isn't really supporting Elon Musk's individualism. They're supporting his ability to be better than us in terms of power and wealth. This is the essential difference between left and right wing. You know what? I should break this down for you. Where do the terms left and right wing come from? Well, they come from after one of the French revolutions, when they essentially came up with their equivalent of a Congress or parliament system to what we have or what Britain has now. And on one side of the house, they had the left wing, literal wing of the house. Now, people who gathered on the left side of the assembly, they supported the concept of democracy and freedoms for individuals, and essentially a breaking down of the religious monarchical hierarchy that had previously run their society. Essentially, a belief in citizens being equal in the eyes of the law. Now, over here on the right wing is essentially the belief that there should be a multi-tiered class system. That is the fundamental concept of right wing. Right wing suggests that some people are better than other people. Now, in America, that's a harder thing to sell, which is why the right leans heavily into the concept of what they call a meritocracy. Now, meritocracy is actually a lot more complicated than people who are pro-meritocracy or even anti-meritocracy would like to believe that it is. Now, the reason, I'm not going to get into meritocracy right now, but the point is that this is the fundamental difference between the left and the right. If you are leaning towards the right, it fundamentally believes that you fundamentally believe that some people are better and deserve more than others. Meanwhile, if the left wing concept believes that we should all be equal citizens in some type of democracy or representative democracy. Now, of course, this is actually a spectrum, so people are going to follow along it at different rates of believing these things. You shouldn't view this as a black and white issue. Now, this question here, though, is also dishonestly framed. A smaller government does not necessarily inherently maximize the freedom of the individual. Now, a smaller government will maximize the ability of individuals to gain power and become their own power structures. Side note, it needs to be noted that governments, corporations, businesses, and religions are all actually power structures. They're not, at the end of the day, they all become governments if they gain enough power, and that's ultimately the goal, the long-term goal of most of them. So this is a very deceptively written question. Do you believe the government should be as small as possible in order to maximize the freedom of the individual? However, there is no evidence that a smaller government will maximize the freedom of the individual. We have plenty of incidents where local and state government curb the rights and abilities of the individual. So no, I fundamentally disagree with this concept. Do you believe healthcare is a human right and should be provided to every citizen by the government? Whether or not it should be provided by the government has a lot more to do with how should we organize society. But that being said, my general answer is yes. Do you support school of choice? The idea that parents should have the ability to send their kids to whatever school they choose and that their tax dollars should follow their child, not the other way around. Uh, so like, here's my big problem. So far, we've gone through a lot of these questions, and my major thought were I assume there are 10. I assume there are 10 questions because PragerU's not thinking this hard about it. These very badly worded questions. The idea that parents should, first of all, I do actually support the concept that you, as a parent, should be able to have some say in your child's education. Whether you want to send them to a private school or homeschool them, I am okay with those things. I, generally speaking, don't support charter schools due to the fact that charter schools have wildly unpredictable outcomes. Some charter schools are great, and other charter schools are absolute trash. And charter schools are not held to the same standards as nonprofit public sector schools, because at the end of the day, the problem with charter schools is that they are a private institution that is paid for by your tax dollars and are not held to the same standards as other systems that are paid for by your tax dollars. They can also teach your kids some wacky stuff. That being said, I guess this is the problem. I agree with half of this question. Do I believe that parents should have the right to choose how their child gets educated? Sure, I do. If they want to pay for a private school, that's fine. If they want to take the poor person option and homeschool their child, actually, it's not really a poor person option, because you got to be able to balance working and doing that. But the point is it costs less to homeschool your kids typically than sending them to a private school. Do I think that your taxes should follow your child to a charter or private school? I do not. Because when you do that, you're being a dick. You are actively siphoning money away from a system that actively improves our society. You see, the value of school is that it sort of raises the bar. We want to have a more well-educated society. And right now, the right is basically trying to tear down education because they don't believe it teaches enough about God, which in a society where we allow for freedom of speech, you can't really have the schools telling you what God to believe in. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of a problem. So do I think that parents should be able to choose? 100%. Absolutely. I have no problem with that. Do I think that your tax dollars you should get out of having to fund and improve society with your tax dollars? No. Do you think privatized healthcare promotes competition between healthcare providers and drives down medical costs? I'm sorry for the disingenuous laugh, but I used to work in health insurance. This is absolute horseshit. This is an idea thought of by total morons. Okay, fun fact. If you are looking at retiring, don't retire to Michigan. Now, to be fair, I haven't sold insurance in a few years. But don't retire to Michigan. The reason you should not retire to Michigan is because their Medicare Advantage plans are outrageously expensive. And it's not because there's no competition. It's because the competition in Michigan is insane. Like medical healthcare plans cost more in Michigan because the private insurance that auto manufacturers used to offer was so good. You see, the problem with competition doesn't drive down the cost of insurance. And the reason it doesn't drive down the cost of insurance is because insurance costs are based on pools, which means the more people in the pool, the more the insurance company can actually afford to insure people. But competition causes those pools to shrink. And the more the pools shrink, the more money is required from the individual putting their money into the pool. So no, competition does not do this for healthcare. Now, you could make the argument that, well, maybe if we didn't have insurance at all, then that would drive down the costs. It might, but how many people would die? Hard to say. So, no, privatized healthcare does not promote competition between healthcare providers and drive down medical costs, at least not on the insurance front. On the insurance front, that is 100% bullshit. No. Do you trust the government to properly educate young people? Wow, that's a tough one. And this is a tough one because one does have to consider the historical fact of why should you trust the government? But the problem becomes, what power structure would you trust to educate your children? Well, I have to say, a government that is attached to a democratic process is the most trustworthy we can get. Doesn't mean there isn't still propaganda in there. There's a reason that you don't actually learn anything real about America until you go to college. But the issue becomes, if you're not going to trust the government to do this, then who do you trust? Well, do you trust the religious? Well, obviously you can't trust religions because religions are themselves a power structure who benefit from brainwashing you and filling your head with ideas that benefit them. Do you trust smaller local government? Well, small and local government are just like the big government, except that they are more capable of directly affecting your life. Well, what about the parents, you might say? Well, let me tell you, as someone who both has children and has met people who have children, that would be the dumbest society ever. Some people are fucking stupid parents. A lot of people are not smart enough to educate their children. I'm sorry. That's the reality. At a certain point, you have to trust someone, or you have to trust a little bit, or maybe just trust but verify. Listen, you have to assume that someone's going to be putting some bullshit in your kid's head. And that's just part of society. If it's not going to be school, then it's going to be the internet. If it's not going to be the internet, then it's going to be you. Do I trust the government to properly educate young people? Properly? Maybe not. To educate them? Yes. To educate them better than some? Also yes. But the wording on these is fucking terrible. You believe that property rights are necessary to live in a free society? The answer to this is yes. Now, some people are going to be like, but Ruben, I thought you were a democratic socialist. Why don't you want us to share everything? Well, because the right has specifically taken language and confused you with it. Now, they're going to be like, but that's your private property. No, an individual does not have private property. An individual has personal property. And yes, you absolutely should have rights to your personal property. Private property simply means that property is not owned by the government or the public at large. A lot of people will say, well, that means personal property is private property. Hold on, though. Private property is normally used to enforce the rights of landowners and major corporations. It doesn't necessarily directly impact you that much. Arguably, some people who own the land that they live on at least own private land property. If you are incorporated, you have some type of private property. But by and large, the clothes on your back, the stuff in your house, this is all what is known as personal property. And to this question, even though I just broke it down as being vaguely dishonest to you, I will say that I agree. Do you support the redistribution of wealth from the rich to the poor to help lift the poor people out of poverty? Yes, I do. Allow me to explain. Do I believe that that's a thing? Yes. Actually, history shows us that wealth redistribution works. The problem, of course, is how do you redistribute the wealth? This is where we get into actual ethics and conversation. Because the answer is yes, wealth redistribution is actually essential. Because for money to function in our society and do what it's supposed to do, it needs to constantly circulate. And if the money is not circulating, then it becomes problems in various areas. Money is kind of a zero-sum game because there is a finite amount of money. I mean, you may say, well, we can just print more, and we can, but that's not a consequence-free action. Now, to be fair, sometimes you do got to print more. However, I also don't like the wording of this question. What I actually believe is that a certain amount of wealth should be invested by the rich to ensure that we as a society have a baseline of sustained needs. What do I mean by that? I mean that there should be a standard of living that everyone in our society should get as a minimum. Now, many people on the right believe that this would make people lazy. Now, the thing about this is that lazy people have jobs all the time. And it's not because, you see, this goes back to personal property. As someone who's been poor, as someone who has lived on assistance at various points in their life, or has lived with people who were living on assistance, I can tell you right now that baseline safety nets are not this free ride that everyone thinks they are. First of all, a number of states make you jump through some ridiculously stupid hoops to get it. Second of all, it's not as much money as you think it is. And third of all, most of it goes to people who actually do work, but don't work enough or don't make enough at their jobs to feed an actual family, because that's a real problem that we have in our society. Poor people are still going to want cars and TVs and video games and Game Boys and soda pop and all that stuff that is extra. And they're going to want to get jobs to get the stuff that is extra. But generally speaking, yes, I agree with this. Do you think the government's regulation of business should be as small and limited as possible? No. Are you fucking stupid? Here's the reality of the majority of regulations. The majority of regulations exist because at some point, some mother friggin' piece of crap in a business or an industry was doing some shit where suddenly everyone was like, well, now the whole town's got cancer. Or, well, just caught the Akron River on fire. Or, as the Cuyahoga, by the way, caught it on fire. Why? Not enough environmental regulations. You see, a lot of regulations are written after the assessment of a problem. Like, you know, seatbelts being fucking standard. Businesses will fuck you. Businesses will fuck you. They do not care. The bigger the business, the less they care. If they can save money or cut corners in some way, they will. Because they are driven by a profit motive. And that profit motive prevents us from being totally rational or ethical. So yes, regulations are essential. Now you might say, but Ruben, if they make a bad product, you know, people will stop using it. The reality of that problem is, though, is that it took us over 100 years, actually even more than 100 years, to realize that smoking fucking killed you. Doctors used to prescribe smoking for things. Then we got regulations. Then we got tests. Then we figured stuff out. Cars used to be giant metal death traps. There used to be lead in the air from gasoline. By the way, we didn't take lead out of the gasoline until the 90s. And by the way, there seems to have been a correlation with the drop of lead in our air and a drop in crime. The reality is that businesses abuse society at any turn they get. And they don't do it even on purpose most of the time. Most of the time, they just think they're trying to take care of themselves, which is why regulations are essential. Is it possible to overregulate? Of course it is. should we at some point examine some of the regulations to see if they can be improved or if they can be reduced or if they're not working effectively? Absolutely, we should. But when people make this black and white argument that the regulation of business should be as small and as limited as possible, it is because they fundamentally do not want to think. Yeah, I knew it only had 10. That's why we're doing this. All right, ready to find out where you are on the ideological divide? You're on the left. Let's see how disingenuously they word this description. When it comes to the political divide in this country, there are two primary sides, the left and the right, although it's really a spectrum and liberals are like somewhere in the middle. The fact that centrists aren't even considered here tells you a lot about what type of propaganda they're trying to spread to you. The left believes the government should be the most powerful force in shaping of society. That is not what the left believes. The left just understands that the government is the most impartial source of power regulation. This is the most wildly this is wildly bad faith representation. I almost want to take it again to find out what it says about the right. Oh no, maybe this is it. The right believes the government's role in society should be kept as limited as possible. Without the belief in an ever-expanding government, there is no left. Without a belief in limited government, there is no right. Wow. Yeah, no, that's not even, doesn't even mean anything. Incredibly disingenuous. Oh, donate, PragerU. Why won't you donate to us? I'm not donating to PragerU. Oh, wait, hold on. I am going to read this, though. Help PragerU reach the next generation? Absolutely not. Young people are bombarded by leftist ideology and often don't even realize it. Many of these young Americans are not opposed to conservative ideas. They've just never heard them properly articulated before. Based on how poorly you, by the way, conservative is not inherently right wing. Conservative is actually a relative term, meaning to prefer something older or more traditional or just being resistant to change. Technically speaking, how conservative you are is a relative fixture. The right uses this to confuse people who are conservative into supporting some pretty terrible ideas. PragerU is committed to educating millions on topics like politics, history, economics, and limited government. And by that, they mean spreading propaganda. We rely on generosity of our supporters to keep our videos free of charge. And by that, they also mean that they have billionaires who donate to them. If you would like to join forces with us to make an even larger impact, we would be honored to welcome you as one of our monthly donors. It's like paying taxes to a corporation. Which, by the way, is essentially what subscriptions are. All right, so that was PragerU's unsurprisingly biased and unsurprising results for myself as to where I am on the political spectrum. Now, I do want to say that I believe in individualism, so I don't want you to assume all of my beliefs based on the fact that I am on the left. But I do want you to understand that PragerU is a dishonest propaganda think tank machine that does not give a shit about being educational or informative. They only care. Wait, this donation is tax deductible? What the? Prager, that's only possible because of the size of the government. You understand that? That things being tax deductible is only a thing because of the government? Actually, I find that disgusting. But hey, that shows you the government isn't biased if they're willing to let you write off this garbage. Oh, all right. Well, thank you for tuning in. I hope you gained some entertainment out of this. Please like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Ding that bell so you know when these videos drop. Please also, if you're taking this in on Spotify or wherever else you get your podcasts, make sure that you follow or like or subscribe, or whatever that podcast platform does. If you would like to contact the show, you can email me at rubenuncut@gmail.com. All right. Thank you for joining me for this tiny diversion. Have a wonderful whatever, wherever, whoever you are.